All righty, we'll get started here then. So welcome back. Like I said, I hope everyone's having a good start to your new year and had a good restful holiday break. We're excited to see some familiar names again. So today, the webinar is going to focus on sort of two main areas. The first one's going to be talking about stakeholders, stakeholder engagement, and stakeholder mapping. And then the second one will be talking about theories of change and logic models. And to give us a nice practical example, we're going to have Diane Thompson talk us through her program evaluation and her stakeholder mapping and theory of change in particular. So looking forward to that. But we are officially at the halfway point of pre-eval. This is webinar number 4 of 8. So for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, congratulations, good job. Thank you for continuing to come back. We just wanted to do a quick little poll here, asking how things are going for you so far with pre-eval. And if you have any comments or anything like that, please feel free to pop them in the chat. If we don't respond to them right now, we can also respond to them in the chat or at a later time. Just give that a second for people to participate in. Okay, I'm going to close it here. All right. So it looks like it's not going less than okay. So that's good. If there is anything that you guys do need help with, or you have feedback or things you'd like us to talk about in more depth, please feel free to send me an email. Here it is on the screen here, kirsty@ualberta.ca. We appreciate any feedback you guys can give us. It helps us improve. And yeah, if you have any questions, we can also talk a little bit later about how to sign up for coaching to sort of help enhance this pre-eval experience as well. Okay. All right, so with that, we'll get into our content for today. So I'll pass it over here to Jason.
Excellent. Thanks, Kirsty. And as Kirsty mentioned, thank you so much for coming back. It's always gratifying to have people come back and listen to us as opposed to us just talking to ourselves here. So I do hope that it is useful. Thank you again, and thanks to Diane for coming to help us out today. Janae is going to introduce her a little bit later in the presentation, so you'll find out about who she is, but a little mystery for now. But we want to get started. Today, as Kirsty mentioned, we got two main topics that we want to talk about: stakeholder identification and mapping, and theory of change and logic models are two kind of big buckets of things that we want to talk about. Now, if you've been following along or participating since the beginning, back in our first pre-eval webinar, we did briefly touch on what stakeholders are. And so just a brief refresher on that. Stakeholders basically are anybody who, or any group or individual or group of individuals who have a vested interest or influence on the program or the thing that we're planning to evaluate. In terms of that, obviously it's a very broad definition, includes a wide range, or could potentially include a wide range of different entities or different individuals. And if you remember from what we discussed in the first webinar, the key thing with our stakeholders is we were just trying to think through all of the potential stakeholders that might be necessary to either gather information from, or to report to, or just to consider as we're developing questions or thinking through the process of doing our evaluation. So I mean, it could be funders, it could be people with lived experience, it could be governmental agencies simply that we're wanting to advocate to. All of those things could be potential parts or included within this definition of a stakeholder. Now, within a community-based evaluation, which is really the framework that we're working from, part of what is even more important than maybe in some other types of or models of evaluation is that we're really advocating a collaborative approach, and our evaluations really are driven by the participation, the active participation of the relevant stakeholders from the community. So I mean, as we talked about different levels of stakeholder involvement, and again, in previous webinars, we've talked about, um, you know, expert-driven evaluations versus community-based evaluations, where in a community-based evaluation, the evaluator really walks alongside of the stakeholder community in doing this. And so it's absolutely essential that we have input from the stakeholder group in helping to define or determine what their evaluation purpose is, to help us figure out what the appropriate questions are. And then ultimately, I mean, if we go all the way back to the beginning, figure out who those stakeholders are that we need to be getting information from and considering. And that, by doing that, hopefully what we'll end up doing is being able to create more positive change from our evaluations, because this is not just, Jason Dennis coming in from the outside, to giving you a report and telling you what to do. This is you gathering data to tell yourselves what to do. And I'm walking along with you, helping you figure out how to do that, but I'm not the one coming in and saying, you must do this, you must do that, and stuff like that. So that's kind of the key difference in this. And I guess I said, this evaluation process exists on a continuum, and it can be very, very much stakeholder based or community based, and less of that, depending upon the resources and your capacity, and also your desire to have the evaluation led by an external source versus kind of an internal or community driven kind of a model. So that's kind of a refresher on some of the stuff that we have talked about in previous webinars. And what we're going to do today is move on to, okay, so how do you do this? What's the process that you go through in terms of figuring out who your stakeholders should be? And so if we look at this in terms of kind of our stakeholder continuum, if we look at this and there's lots of different ways that we can conceptualize this, but if you want to think about this at this point in time as kind of just a basic brainstorming process, where we're going to throw kind of a wide net out there and try to think of all of the potential stakeholders that might be involved in our particular evaluation. And so if we look at this in terms of an engagement, levels of engagement, and we look at what we have on the screen here. And what we've got, if you follow the yellow arrow from the left to the right, what we've got are increasing levels of community involvement. Okay, things like impact, trust, communication flow, as we move from left to right. And so on the very left-hand side, that first kind of column there, what we have here in terms of our stakeholder engagement is the level of outreach or inform. And so for some of our stakeholders, okay, all we're doing is we're informing them about, what is happening, what's going on, maybe what the results are, providing, information to community or stakeholders. So this might be simply reporting back to a community group about what we found in the process of doing our evaluation. Okay, there's no bidirectionality necessarily in that particular process. It's a one way we're providing information. This could be providing information to funders, I guess, in terms of if it was just providing a report, one-way process. Okay, and then as we move right to the next column, we have then consult. And in this particular process, our main goal here is we're seeking answers. Okay, we're giving information, and we're trying to get feedback as a result of giving the information. So in this case, maybe as opposed to just sort of delivering a report, we hold a community forum where we provide information, we take questions, and we ask, does this reflect your experience, or something similar to kind of that. And so what you see there is we're getting a little bit more, involvement from the community. Again, not lots, right? This is simply just we're kind of having a back and forth a little bit. As we move then further to the right, we have then involve. Okay. And the goal of this one is actually work with the public as opposed to just sort of get kind of feedback with them. And so in this particular kind of level of community involvement, what we're doing is we're working with the community to ensure that their wishes and their concerns are represented. So in this case, probably what I would do is I would actually be working with the community prior to going out and actually doing the evaluation. Right. And we've all been, maybe I shouldn't assume this, but I feel like there are many instances in the world around us where people want to make it look like they are doing public engagement. We've got one that I just noticed here in Edmonton. They're doing on the Terwillegar Drive. They've been working on this for forever. And I just noticed as I was driving on the White Mud, there's a big billboard that says, "Come and join us for public engagement and share your feedback on what should happen with Williger Drive," which seems a bit stupid since they've already just done all the work on Terwilliger Drive. So I'm not sure what kind of feedback they want from me other than just to sort of say, yeah, you did a good job. And so in these cases, I think sometimes people feel a little bit like, okay, this is just you trying to make it look like, you want some feedback. And that's not what we're talking about in here, right? We're working with the public in that case to get information beforehand, before all the decisions are made in this case. And then if we go farther to the right, we up that even one more level where we're collaborating with the community. Okay. And instead of sort of just, sort of picking and choosing and saying, okay, I need help with this, or I need help with that, or we need to work together on this aspect, really, this is a collaborative model. And one of the key things about collaboration is collaboration really involves shared responsibility for the outcomes of a particular project. And so if we're doing true collaboration, what we're doing is we're sharing power equally amongst all the different kind of people who are collaborating in this case. And so on each aspect of the evaluation, so from the development of the project to the solution to the sharing of outcomes, we are actively working with the community to facilitate each of those different stages. And then if we go to the farthest right, we have empower. And what empower is, this is, again, a strong bidirectional relationship. And this is where the public has the decision-making power. And this is, I mean, if we think about it in terms of the role of the evaluator, the role of the evaluator in this particular case is really to function as an agent of that empowerment, where the evaluator is working with the community groups for them to do their evaluation. And this is kind of the model that I was talking about when we were starting off, saying, this is the one where I don't come in as an evaluator and say, you could do this, you got to do this. I come in and I work with you to figure out what you want to do and how you want to develop your goals and what you want to do in that. And so what I'm trying to do in that case is I'm really just trying to enable you to do your own evaluation, as opposed to me taking an active role in the evaluation. And so, as I said, there's no one right or wrong place in this sort of continuum, but these are all, and again, this is not entirely inclusive, it's kind of an overview, but it gives you a sense of the different roles that evaluation can play and the different ways that stakeholders can be involved in this particular process, from like very, very involved to like it's their evaluation to just being informed about the results of an evaluation. So, pardon me. If we then talk about, okay, so this mapping process, what does that actually mean to map out stakeholders? So this gets back to this whole brainstorming process. Okay. So if I was going to start this process, what I would do is sit down with whoever, again, my project team is. And if this was on the empowerment model, what I'd be doing is working with a community group, and they would be the ones doing this. And I would kind of be prompting or helping them. If I was the evaluator coming in, I would be kind of working on this and getting feedback from them. But really what I'm thinking about here are a few things. Okay. And this is just to sort of put a caveat on this. This is just one example of what a stakeholder map could look like. There's lots of different types of stakeholder maps. I kind of like this one, so this is kind of the one that I'm showing you. But I don't want to make you think like this is the only way that you can do this. This is just one way to look at this. So the way that I like to do this. So if you look at these, what we call concentric circles here, we've got three concentric circles. In the very middle, with the yellow, what we would have here are people with lived experience. And so when we're thinking about this in terms of stakeholders, these are people who can talk about the phenomenon that we're interested in because they actually have lived that phenomenon. And so, for example, like some of the models that I've looked at, pardon me, some of the evaluations I've looked at student resilience, right? And so people with lived experience are obviously the students, right, who are going to school. They would be the ones that we're gathering data from to tell us about their experiences with resilience. But it could also be the families of those students. It could also be the teachers who are working with those students. It could be frontline staff. So depending on how I define lived experience, that could include a number of different people. Then if I move another layer out, what we have is a level called influencers. And influencers are those people who impact the lives of those who live with the issues. And so again, if we look at sort of our groups, Okay, well, that could be, I mean, if the teachers aren't people with lived experience, then obviously they are influencers. And we could also extend that out. Maybe the administration, school administration could be influencers. This could be also individuals who have no direct impact, I mean, no direct contact with the people lived experience, but nonetheless, their decisions influence the lives of those who live with the issue. And so this could be people, for example, making decisions about resource allocation, right? Where they're going to allocate staff and different types of things, which could have a direct impact on those people with lived experience. And then if we move out one more layer or one more level, we then have sustainers. And sustainers would be those people who have the power and resources to make lasting change and influence people's lives. And so sustainers could be, for example, funders, levels of government who control, funding envelopes, and again, those types of things. Now, as I said, this is one way to map this. One of the challenges, maybe Diane, when she talks later on, she might be able to give some of her own experiences with this. But one of the big challenges we often have when we introduce this with students is, as you start going through this process, what you really start to realize very quickly is it's really hard for some groups to put them in one and only one category. And you get people like even the ones I mentioned, like teachers. If you're working in a school-based kind of intervention program, are teachers people with lived experience or are they influencers? Well, the reality is they're probably both of those things, right? Are funders influencers or sustainers? Could be that they straddle the line. Sometimes they fall more on one side, sometimes they fall more on the other side. So don't get too hung up on, oh my goodness, like what happens if they don't all fit in one bucket? They could straddle the lines, they might move, the other aspect of this we don't often talk about is the temporal aspect, right? We often like to think when we're planning evaluations is these things like static, right? That this is how, things are at, January, whatever it is, 10th, 2022. Tomorrow it might be completely different, right? And the next day and stuff like that. And so things shift and move around, but don't get too concerned about this. Remember what this is this is just an opportunity for you to map out all of those people who potentially have a stake in this evaluation, and to use that to make plans about involvement. How are you going to involve those different individuals, right? People with lived experience, right? Are those people that I actually need to gather data from? Do I need to create a survey so that I can, get those experiences from? Do I need to do interviews with it? Do I need, when in my plan for knowledge mobilization, maybe I need to figure out who are the people that I need to keep informed of this data, so that when I send out my communications, I've got them on a list of people that I need to do this. Who are the people that I need to consult when I'm doing this to make sure that I'm, incorporating all the things I need to think about. And so that's what this process is really about, is that brainstorming to really get a sense of who are all of these peoples. These people. And again, the engagement with them, as we talked about in the previous slide, could vary dramatically based on what role we think that they should or could play a role in our evaluation. Now, if we flick to the next slide, right, another way that we could look at this, we talked about people with lived experience, influencers, sustainers. You could also talk about like primary, secondary, tertiary kinds of levels of involvement. Primary, these are individuals who could use evaluation findings to actually affect changes in programs. And so instead of kind of the other one we were talking about, the people with lived experience, this is more of a breakdown in terms of how the data can be used by those stakeholders. Okay, so again, primary can use the evaluation findings to affect changes in program. Secondary, these are individuals who are affected by the program changes. And tertiary are people who have a possible interest in the findings, but aren't themselves directly impacted by the findings. So again, all this is a different way that we can lay out those stakeholders in some sense to give us an idea about how we can best include or involve all of those stakeholders in meaningful ways. And we could go on and on and on. Like there's innumerable kinds of different stakeholder maps and different ways that we can break these down and look at them. So all I would suggest is and you can try these out and see which ones work best for you. But what you do if you're doing an evaluation is take some time before you get too far down in the evaluation and go through the process of stakeholder mapping. Try to sort of break it down, look at whatever levels that you think are useful. We're giving you two kind of models here. But there's other ways that you can do this. And so what you want to do is just map them out. And once you've mapped them out, then we can start to look at the different ways that you can engage those stakeholders. And so Kirsty, can you just switch to the next slide for me? And so here again, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just to give you kind of a sense of some of the different ways the different stakeholder groups or individuals could be involved in your evaluation, pardon me. Either as evaluation participants, people from whom or from whom we gather data that tell us about their experiences. So again, if we're talking about those people lived experience, these could be focus groups or surveys or interviews where we gather data from people. We might have an evaluation team where we actually include people in the team that are developing our survey instruments. And as I said, I mean, people can fall in different categories too. If I was working with like a school, I might have on my evaluation team members of the school staff that might be helping me to create evaluation questions. If your program is large enough, you might actually have a steering committee. I've been on several evaluations with community groups where we have actually a community steering committee, where we've got a number of different individuals from the community that have committed to sit on our steering committee and provide kind of direction and oversight on a lot of the evaluations that we're doing. And so, I mean, this comes in terms of all of the different stages that we're doing our evaluation. And the nice thing about that is when we pick our steering committees, what we try to do is pick individuals who have connections with the groups that we're trying to do our evaluations with. And so when we're trying to reach maybe hard to reach groups, I mean, I can reach out to members of the steering committee and say, you tell me, how can I best interact or gather appropriate data from these different groups, and they can give me information on those kinds of things. Feedback sessions that we talked about, right, where I'm sharing stuff back, community forums where we might have a little bit more of a back and forth, we can answer some questions. We can create new community projects, okay, based on our findings. We can decide, okay, so what now? Where does this go from here? Implementing the results of the evaluations. Okay, and so we can work with different stakeholder groups to actually get something done with these results, or recommendations. And here, give you one cautionary, not cautionary tale. I find most of my examples of things are things that I screwed up, but I learned from them, and so I find they were helpful for me, and hopefully they'll be helpful to other people. And I might have shared this one before, but one of the situations where I didn't do my due diligence, where I could have done a little bit more. I was doing an evaluation looking at the current state of senior centers in the province. And I think we'd done a fantastic job. We've done a lot of the appropriate things. We did lots of stakeholder engagement. We had a steering committee. We had all sorts of different types of groups that were involved in helping us draft our evaluation questions. We went across the whole province. We visited senior centers from like way northern Alberta to way southern Alberta and all the major cities. We did extensive interviews, or we called other ones. So we had some fantastic data, and so I was invited after we had done the report and some of the stuff. I was invited to a forum, and it was, I would say, it was a community forum, but it wasn't sort of open to the overall community. It was open to the Senior Centers Associations of Alberta. They all had representations there, and so I was coming to present the report, and unbeknownst to any of us, the Minister for Seniors got wind of this and actually decided just to show up to this forum, which was fantastic. We had no idea that he was going to be there. But it was great for us. Now, here's where I didn't do my due diligence. As I'm standing up, giving this report and sharing all this information, we had a kind of a feedback session where we asked questions and asked them to provide information. And the Minister of Seniors said to me, so if you had, unlimited access, or you had sort of what direct access to the Minister of Seniors, what would be your key recommendations from this report to the Minister of Seniors? I hadn't thought any of that stuff through. I was totally like caught off guard on that. And I was like trying to figure out on top of my head as I'm sitting there in front of this guy, trying to figure out some useful things to say. Anyway, I blew it. I didn't have anything to say. Like, I think the results were fantastic, but I should have actually thought about, okay, so what are the key recommendations? What are the key messages that I want to actually make in this case? And I didn't have anything prepared for that. So that's kind of how I think of this, the stakeholder mapping is as something where, if you're prepared for those kinds of things, you have your elevator speech already ready, and you know what it is that you want, the message you want to get across to the different levels of individuals that might, play a role in this. So anyway, with that, I'm going to shift now to theory of change and logic models. Now, once we have our stakeholder groups identified, one of the things that we want to sort of think about now is setting up our theory of change and our logic model. So a little bit of this, again, we did chat about this briefly before, and just to remind you, a theory of change basically explains what your program has in terms of resources, what it does in terms of activities, and what you expect to happen as a result of doing those activities. So these would be then our outcomes, our impacts. A logic model is a tool that we use to visually represent kind of the connections in our theory of change, right? So it's a visual depiction of our theory of change. In essence, it's kind of a roadmap and describes, how we connect, our resources with what we're doing, with what we expect to happen, and lays it out in, as the name suggests, so kind of a logical fashion that we can follow as we're trying to set up our programs. Pardon me. So, what does a logic model look like? Just like with our stakeholder map, there's lots of different ways that these can be set up. Now, I tend to be a very linear-minded kind of person. Linear things really make me happy. And so this is kind of if you Google like logic models and examples, you'll probably see some variation of what we have on the screen here right now. This is a very linear kind of approach to it. If you take a logic, like an evaluation class or a course, this is probably one of the examples that you'll see, or some form of this one. And so in this logic model, as you move from left to right, we have inputs on the very left-hand side. Those are, again, the resources we have available, the activities, the things that we do. The outputs, these are the direct product of the activities. So in sort of practical terms, the way that I always think about outputs, these are kind of like the numbers of things that happen, right? The number of individuals that come to a class, the number of courses that we provide, the number of pamphlets that we distribute, the number of widgets that are created, whatever it happens to be. These are kind of the numbers, the outputs. And from those outputs then, this is where the logic model really becomes useful, is we have then outcomes that would be connected to all of those outputs. So if I am generating outputs, why, right? What do I expect to happen as a result of, having these courses, or as a result of creating pamphlets, or whatever it is that I happen to be doing? And these outcomes can be short-term, intermediate, long-term. And the short-term, intermediate, and long-term here really are dependent on your own definitions of short-term, intermediate, and long-term, right? And that's going to be dependent on what type of program you're running. Some of these ones, for some of the projects I work in that are large kind of social initiatives, long-term is like years and years and years and years. Intermediate might be, in the next year or so, and short-term could be within the next 6 months to a year. But that could be completely different depending upon your own organization and your own environmental kinds of things that surround your program. On the bottom, what you'll often see again are things that we need to consider when we're creating this logic model. So one example of this is assumptions. Okay, These are the underlying assumptions that influence the program's design, implementation goals. The other one is external factors or context. And so assumptions could be, assuming that funding levels remain consistent for the next 5 years could be an assumption that I might have. An external factor, one that we're currently all living in, is like COVID, right? That's an external factor that can influence all sorts of different types of things. And so if we label those out there, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make this process that sometimes we just do implicitly explicit and just lay it out there and make the connections between all those different things that we're doing. And so just to show you what a completed logic model of this variety might look like, we've got one from one of my colleagues, Rebecca Gokert, who did a program with the Tara Brentwood Housing project. And this is an example of a logic model that group created. And so you see it's this very linear process. Left, we have the inputs, then we've got the activities, okay? This one doesn't have outputs in it, but if you had outputs, they would fall between kind of the greeny and the red colors. You might have a column, thank you, of outputs there where you can kind of label that, okay? And then you have your outcomes. In this case, short is defined as 6 months to a year, medium is 1 to 2 years, and long is 3+ years. But then that could be whatever time frame that you determine. Now, if you look through this, what you'll hopefully see in this case, and what I would do next in this process if I was going through this, is I would start to draw arrows between all of these different things there. And I would want to make sure that all of my activities that I'm doing are attached to outputs or outcomes. And if they're not, then what that does is it allows me to look back and say, okay, so if I have an outcome that's not attached to any activity, how do I expect to actually achieve that outcome if it's not actually attached to anything? And if I've got activities that aren't attached to outcomes, what I could ask myself is, why am I doing this? Right? If I don't have any expectation of what's going to happen as a result of doing this. And so if you've done any program planning, again, you probably have done some form of this at some point. And this is the purpose of this really, again, is just making what often is implicit explicit. Now, if you're not like me and you don't like linear things and nice check boxes and stuff like that, there are also other ways that we can set these things up. And so here, I just wanted to give you another example of a logic model. And then this is again from my colleague, Rebecca Gokert, for the same project. But what you see here, instead of a linear approach, what she really did was kind of more of a visual approach here. And you still have the same kinds of things in there. You have inputs, right? So in this case, they use the kind of analogy of the apple tree here to create their logic model. And for an apple tree to grow, you got to have things like sunlight and rain and all that kind of stuff to make it grow. Okay, the activities that you're doing, right? This is the growth of the roots and then the trunk growing up and all that kind of stuff. And then if we look at our outcomes, then our short-term outcomes are things like the buds that grow up. The medium term are the apples that start to grow. Then the long-term outcomes are like you make this nice apple pie and eat your apple pie. And then for the the environmental things or the stuff that's going on, you could have like different challenges, right? Drought or acid rain or other stuff that's going to get in the way of this. So all this is a much more visual way to do the same type of thing we're doing with a very linear box-like approach, depending upon who you're working with, and especially if you're working with community groups. Sometimes those very sterile boxes and linear approaches just don't speak to people in the same way that a nice kind of visual representation could work. And so again, I don't know that we have time, but Christy does have, I think, a number of different examples that she could share with you. I'll let Christy decide if she has time for that. But if not, this gives you kind of an overview of, again, participant and stakeholder engagement and our theory of change and logic models. Christy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Sure, yeah. So I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of the logic and models and theory of change today, but they will be posted on the Moodle site. So again, I encourage you to sign up for that. I'll pop the link in there again towards the end of today's webinar. But because we didn't actually give you an example of a stakeholder map, I don't think, I'll share one right now. And let's see, basic, this one. All right, so this is from McMahon. They are let's see here. This is McMahon Youth, Family, and Community Services Association, and this was their collaborative service delivery program. So they bring together a few different organizations and they work to support youth. And they joined us in our Eval initiative just this last spring, where they worked with a group of students to create an evaluation plan. And part of that was creating a stakeholder map. And they used similarly the primary or people with lived experience, out to influencers, out to sustainers. And you can see here what that looked like for them. So for them, they had their families in the middle as the people with the most lived experience, and people with more maybe distal lived experience are the people who work directly with them. So the collaborative service delivery staff, the management, and other McMahon programs that were related and that helped work with the families. Outside of that, they had their community influencers. So these were people like their subcontracted service providers, post-secondary partners, elected officials, First Nations communities, all these individuals who had an influence on what they were doing. And then they looked at their institutions as those sustainers. So caseworkers, for example, children's services, CARF, Government of Alberta. And then what they also did, you can see, is they had the people in purple as the people who were more directly involved with what they were doing. So the caseworkers were their referral source, for example. The staff and the management were working directly with families. So that's one example of what a stakeholder map might look like. And again, there are more and other ways that you can do stakeholder mapping, like Jason said, and those I will share some examples of those on the Moodle site for those of you who are interested. And if none of those fit, you can also come to coaching, which again, we'll talk about later. And we can work together to sort of create a stakeholder map that fits for your program. And something that is sometimes for people, it's a matter of making it really representative and meaningful for their stakeholders as well. So speaking of, we will maybe pass it over to Janae to introduce Diane here.
Thank you, Kirsty. So I'm going to introduce Diane. So Diane Thompson spent 34 years in secondary school systems in a variety of roles. She has her PhD in educational policy analysis and has been involved in a lot of research projects throughout her career. Diane joined us for UEval, which is a week-long intensive course which is offered by the ECN, where, as Kirsty mentioned, students at the University of Alberta and Queen's University collaborated with community organizations to develop evaluation plans. And I was actually one of the students who worked on Diane's case study and helped develop an evaluation plan for her community action group. Diane's community action group is called the Peninsula Action Committee for Education, also known as PACE. And they work to advocate to the Ontario Ministry of Education for improved rural education in her specific area. They are currently working on a research proposal based on that evaluation plan that was developed in UEval to follow through with the implementation of the evaluation plan, which was created during the course. So in this evaluation plan, we created a stakeholder map and a theory of change. And today, Diane is going to speak about her personal experience with creating that stakeholder map and theory of change. So thank you so much, Diane, for being here today, and I will pass it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I've been a member of PACE for a number of years. It started in response to the Ontario Ministry of Education going about closing a large number of small, mostly rural schools. And we live in a rural community and have a pretty rural school board. We knew the important role of local learning opportunities plays in our community. So we galvanized to do something about it. And our goals were to invite, inform, and influence. But to influence, you need more than local knowledge. Next one. You need to have data. Local feedback isn't enough. The information has to get to those who make decisions about education in Ontario. So we had been in contact with the Rural Ontario Institute and participated in their exploration of rural community vitality. So obviously our focus was the role of schools. Results were very clear. Community is a major stakeholder in rural local education. Now that online learning has become a basic part of the education landscape, we've been getting local feedback on the strengths and challenges of online learning for rural students. In a couple of our project meetings, my internet cut out. So just as a basic problem in rural communities, that was one. So our current project started because, well, basically with Michelle Searle's, Dr. Michelle Searle's article. She's from Queens, and it was she and 7 others, grad students, wrote perspectives from students, how to tame the chaos and harness the power of technology for learning. And that was where we started. We knew that we have skills as a local community, but we needed to attach to a university. We couldn't get permission to do research from our school board unless we involved a university and their ethics review team. So as it turns out, several people who work with Michelle, I had known from my own PhD studies. And so it was an easy and wonderful connection to make. So contacted her, and that led us to the Eval Institute, which is our second piece of good fortune. So hence our present initiative to have rural students evaluate the online experience that has been created for them. This is going beyond local knowledge into data. Okay, so where are we? So if you look at the map on the left, you'll see Lake Huron, and it says Manitoulin Island, and then there's Georgian Bay, and just below to the south of Manitoulin Island is a peninsula, and that's the Bruce Peninsula, and that is where we're from Pace, and we're working with a school board that if you go over to the right-hand map, includes the Bruce Peninsula and some parts to the south of it. So we felt that a stakeholder map is in the shape of our school board, which covers 2 counties, by the way, in Ontario, Bruce and Grey. This stakeholder map was created by our UEval group to reflect the complexity of stakeholders, but geography being a really important part of that. There is, we have sort of subtle messages from policies, through policies of the Ministry of Education, that rural education is often seen as not as good as urban education. Anyways, so we felt that our urban geography was an important part of those stakeholders. So it ranges from internal, below that center line, and external, and then to the left of the center line, and external to the right, and strategic. So we've called them different things than you did, Jason, and operational, people involved in the operations. If you notice that the municipalities were not even in that stakeholder group. Families, parents, local businesses, local politics, I guess that would be, but the whole community was not part of what's seen as stakeholders. So we separated it into local businesses and local politics. We felt that the students were clearly our main stakeholders. The board has already initiated a parent survey, so it was students who hadn't been heard from. Okay, our questions. This also is from our U-Eval sessions. So it was what Jason was talking about, being critical. To what extent does the online learning model meet the needs of rural students in Ontario? There has been discussion about having it all course content coming from a central body in Toronto, called TV Ontario, and that so that the content would essentially be not negotiable in individual communities. So we wanted to hear, like, what have students experienced last year, second semester last year in particular, since the time is getting on. Students are the major stakeholders, and they are the last ones to be listened to. So we wanted to hear from the students, and we wanted just a second now. Yeah, how can we move from students making recommendations to communicating those recommendations and having influence on school boards and provincial government? School boards are easier to influence than provincial governments. So, okay. So the next one from U-Eval was our logic model. And don't worry if you can't read the left column, but those 3 blue boxes on the left is what we're going to focus on next. So we'll take a look at the next slide, and you can see human inputs. We have our project team, which is PACE, the qualified research, which is really handy that I'm a qualified researcher. It's because I'm a volunteer, because we have a limited budget, but that's another square to address. We're very fortunate to have the Professor Michelle Searle from Queen's University and 3 amazingly competent grad students, Jennifer Hughes, Francois Lavasseur-Portelance, and Roxalana Marmash. And we also have a just graduated from grade 12 student who's now at Brock University, but he is our student sort of spokesperson, and he's been with us all along and has gone through our survey and made suggestions, and so he's been a great supporter. The municipality of Northern Bruce Peninsula, which is our particular municipality, has sponsored us to get the Community Foundation Grey Bruce funding. We don't have a lot. We have a little bit left over from the Rural Ontario Institute. So I'm now in the top right blue box. And the municipality sponsored us to get some funding from Community Foundation's Grey Bruce, and we haven't got any other funding. So limited funding is one of our challenges. It will probably mostly go to grad students, which is fine, but we don't have a lot, which is probably a limitation of a lot of community efforts. The materials we have, it took us quite a while to come up with an online survey. So we have just a week ago submitted our ethics review. So that took a lot longer than it would have had, say, if I had been doing research on my own. That's a fairly a much more straightforward operation. But if you're looking at community research, it's not straightforward. It takes a while to establish sort of communication patterns, and we had one person in charge of the ethics review who was just kind of keeping us on track, one of the grad students, and it was still a much longer haul than we expected it to be. But we have now established the online survey and all of the consent forms that need to be go along with that. But our original intent was to have interviews following up. But we have decided that because of the timelines, we need to get this ethics review in fairly quickly. And we will put in either an amendment to the ethics review or a separate ethics review to cover interviewing students, because the passive parent consent that is required for an online survey is a lot less complex than the consent that would be required for them to be interviewed. So it's very complex working with students under 18, and just took a lot longer than we expected. So we think we've got all our ducks lined up now, but it's community research is not efficient, which but that's not the main goal of community research. Okay, so it's taken us longer. So in the spring, we hope to get the ethics review, ethics approval, and which was needed for the school board approval, distribute the online surveys and get the analysis. Once we've got the survey analysis, then we can sort out the interview questions that we need to establish, and then analyze those interviews. And then we look at the presentation of reports to school board, the municipality, as education partners. That would be People for Education, Community Schools Alliance. There's a Rural Ontario Mayors Association. So there are all kinds of places that we're prepared to make presentations to. I definitely don't want to limit it to just an academic article, but that probably might be part of it. So it's like I say, taking us longer than we thought, but that's part of community research. We need to reach sustainers. And the sustainer that has the most power is the Ministry of Education. And that's why we have to start with more local. We'll start with making presentations to like the school board. The school board, we know from past experience, we have good support from. The municipality, we have good support from. But we need to go past that to look at the Ministry of Education. So that's a big what's next, but that's our goal. And the two main partners in PACE right now in this project are known for persistence, that I think my husband calls but stubbornness, but I prefer to think of it as persistence. That's what you'll need. Okay. Just some specific challenges. Obviously, the municipalities in Ontario, especially small rural ones, have zero connection with the Ministry of Education or even the school boards. They are totally separate silos. The health units have some overlap, but different mandates. So getting different government areas to actually put those different colored puzzle pieces in a way that will actually mesh is a huge challenge. So to get the puzzle pieces to create an integrated, effective rural education system, well, you know that you can imagine changing provincial policy is a rather daunting task. Okay. Oh, I have to tell you one interesting, that isn't in my notes here, but interesting challenge that myself and my research partner with PACE have got a fair amount of experience in education. And the grad students said, well, let's do everything on Google Docs. And so one of our challenges for the two of us was to get used to doing things on Google Docs. But we've learned, we like that, we've learned. And our next meeting with the team is to just sort of streamline our process through which we take advantage of Google Docs. So you talk about challenges, they go from Google Docs to the Ministry of Education. Anyways, but thank you very much, okay, for the opportunity to share this.
Thank you so much for sharing, Diane. That was really great, really informative. I think some really key pieces that I'm taking away from what you shared is some of the iterative nature, so to speak, of logic models. You start with your inputs and you start with your timelines, and things change and things have to shift, and the context changes and you don't get to do face-to-face like you had planned, for example. And so how that shifts, I think you've got a really great perspective on that, and how to make sure that you're resilient and flexible, because I imagine working with community, it requires flexibility. And I also think your stakeholder map was really awesome, because I liked that you guys made it meaningful and that you used your geography, and you really clarified who was your key informant, which was your students. And one of the things that you guys will have noticed is she had her evaluation questions. We'll start talking about that actually in our next pre-eval on February 11th. But you can see how that stakeholder map kind of helped guide the questions and the logic model, and how they all were kind of interrelated. And yeah, Diane and her group have done a really wonderful job, I think, of putting together this evaluation and working within the community to do some important work. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. I appreciate that so much. And yeah, you're getting some thanks in the chat as well. So that kind of wraps it up for today. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the chat now. But as we wrap up, just some things to consider. So like I had mentioned, the Moodle site, which I'm putting in the chat now, you can access it and sign up for it there. That is where you will get access to coaching, which is set to launch hopefully next week. We're just waiting to get approval from our leadership team on tomorrow, hopefully. So if you watch the Moodle site, you'll be able to get a link to sign up for individual coaching hours. Originally, it was 3 sessions per year, but I think we've kind of opened it up. So if you have questions about your stakeholder map or logic model, and you are an AMP partner or willing to become one, this is a great chance to explore those, get some feedback, work through from the start, whether you want to look at a completed one that you already have done. We invite you to join us for the coaching sessions. And the other piece is that our pre-eval number 5, like I said, we'll be talking about setting up your evaluations to be within your means. So picking a purpose and evaluation questions that are not too broad and things you can accomplish, and how to make sure you're specific and meaningful in setting those up. So we hope you'll join us for that February 11th from 12 to 1. And you can find the registration on the AMP website. And yeah, we will be launching our pre-evals number 6, 7, and 8 here coming shortly for registration. So watch your emails for that. And thanks for joining us. I don't see any questions or comments. So we hope you guys have a good afternoon. Great. Thanks guys so much. Take care.